Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Church on the Green, located in New Haven, Connecticut. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are invited and welcome. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Church on the Green, please visit our website at unitednewhaven.org. Thank you.
A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
My name is Laura Kistart. I just finished my first year at Yale Divinity School, and I'm working on a Master's of Divinity. I have 2 more years left in the program there. And I'm on the ordination track in the United Church of Christ. Next year I will be doing my supervised ministry internship at Spring Glen Church in Hamden. I am so grateful to be here today with you all and to share and worship together and to share this message. I'm also thankful to Pastor Bonnie for inviting me to be here and to share this message with you. When Pastor Bonnie first emailed me asking if I would be interested in preaching today, I was a little nervous because I have a confession. This is my first sermon. Thank you. I've done many reflections, and retreats have been a big part of my faith journey, and I've shared reflections at those. I've shared my testimony in different settings, but I have never given a sermon on a Sunday. So again, I am so thankful for this opportunity. When I got that email, then I was communicating with Pastor Bonnie about what I would talk about today, and I looked to see what the lectionary reading was for today, and it was that passage in Mark that Edwin just read so beautifully for us. And when I saw that that was the passage that was for today, I immediately felt assured of God's presence and felt comforted, because this is a passage that I have used many times in prayer. The type of prayer that I've used this with is called Lectio Divina, that is divine reading translated into English, or sacred reading. This is a type of prayer that I want to share with you today and to tell you about, because I think that it's a very powerful type of prayer that many people haven't heard of, especially not in the UCC, because it's very frequently used by Benedictine monks, but it can also be used by everyday people. And this can be a type of prayer that you use with Bible passages that you are reading slowly and carefully, but you can also use it with your favorite poem. It doesn't have to be spiritual writings that you can use with Lectio Divina. And especially because this passage in Mark, I think, is a really great one to use for this type of prayer. When you read through this passage, you can imagine yourself in it. There's such vivid imagery. Starting with, at the beginning of the passage, it says very clearly, when evening had come. So we know what the time of day is. If we're using this passage in prayer, we can picture in our minds, it's the end of the day, evening had come. Jesus and the disciples, they've been working with large crowds. They've been teaching and preaching and praying with people. And they're tired. It's the end of the day, and they're ready to make their travels to their next place that they're going to be the next day. And another thing that's really interesting about this passage is we get insight into Jesus' human condition. Jesus falls asleep. He's tired, just like we experience how we feel tired. Jesus felt that way too. And so he falls asleep in the boat, and the disciples are with him, but they start to get afraid when the storm comes. It's also important to remember that many of the disciples, they were fishermen by trade, so they were not easily afraid of a storm. The fact that they are so afraid shows how serious this storm was. And they're with Jesus in the boat, and they're starting to get nervous. But imagine yourself in this scenario. Jesus is your teacher and leader. He's so important to you, and you know how much he needs his rest. You don't want to wake him up if you don't have to. You want to let him get his sleep. And so we can picture ourselves in this scenario. And so the disciples are thinking, do we need to wake Jesus up? Should we let him sleep? But ultimately they decide, this is a very serious situation. We need to wake Jesus up, even though we don't want to. And maybe you've been in a situation like that, where you've been nervous. You don't want to ask for help. You want to just see if you can figure it out yourself. But you can ask God in those situations. You can ask Jesus for help. And so the disciples do that. They wake Jesus up. They're not really sure what he's going to do. And we know that they're not sure because they are so amazed when he actually calms this storm. Another thing I think is so important about this passage is the words that Jesus uses to calm this storm. Just 3 simple words: peace, be still. Those 3 words, I think, are so important for us to remind ourselves in the hustle and bustle of our everyday life. How often do we need to tell ourselves, peace, be still? Those, you can write those words maybe on a Post-it, put them by your computer, or just to journal and reflect on them. Because those are words that Jesus is saying to us when we go through stormy times, that those words can calm us. The last thing that I think is really interesting about this particular passage is, as I mentioned before, the response of the disciples. They had been working with Jesus, traveling with him, seeing him, teach and work with large crowds, but they're still amazed at this miracle that he has performed by calming the storm. In this translation it says, they were filled with great awe, but other translations also say they were terrified. And again, I ask you to consider if you've been in a situation like that where, maybe with a close friend or your coworker or your family member, where you've known this person for a long time, but they still blow you away by the power that they have. And hopefully, like in this situation, it's a good thing. You realize that you weren't giving someone enough credit, maybe, that they can do wonderful things too. And with that, I also want to just talk a little bit more about the prayer practice of Lectio Divina, and I think that we will try to do a little bit of that. So Lectio Divina, again, like I said, is this divine reading. And you are reading a prayer passage or a passage in the Bible or a poem. You're reading it slowly, meditatively. The setting is very important. Hopefully you can put yourself in a quiet place, put your phone in the other room or put it on airplane mode. And that by reading, I especially like to use Bible passages because to put yourself in a passage like this one that we have in Mark, you're able to connect with the text and remember that God is still speaking. This text is not just an old book that needs to sit on the shelf. It's one that we can use in our everyday life. And by using this prayer practice of Lectio Divina, we can reconnect with the text and imagine its applications to our everyday life. So I'm going to read this passage 2 more times. We've already heard it once. And this next time that I read it, I just invite you to think about words or phrases that are sticking out to you as you hear this passage. We'll then have about a minute of just quiet reflection time. I will read the passage one last time, and in that last time I invite you to pick out one word or phrase that you might carry with you in the week ahead, that God is calling you to in this time. I'll read the passage once more. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe, and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" I invite you now to a moment of reflection, thinking about any words or phrases that stood out to you in this reading.